The strategic landscape of the Middle East has shifted from a state of simmering tension into a theater of high-intensity kinetic warfare, as Central Command confirms that the campaign against Iranian military infrastructure is accelerating at an unprecedented pace. The latest operational updates indicate that the initiative remains firmly in the hands of coalition forces, with a series of decisive strikes, effectively dismantling the tactical assets once used to threaten international shipping lanes. Recent aerial reconnaissance and combat footage released by military authorities showcase the precision and lethality of the current engagement, highlighting a specific mission that targeted an array of fast attack vessels near the critical choke point of the Strait of Hormuz. In one particularly striking engagement, a specialized strike package successfully neutralized a disguised fast attack boat that had been concealed beneath heavy foliage on a transport trailer, a clear indication of the desperate measures being taken by the opposition to preserve what remains of their maritime denial capabilities. This success is being framed not merely as a series of tactical victories, but as a systematic erosion of the enemy's ability to project power beyond its borders. The official rhetoric emanating from the Department of Defense suggests a departure from the doctrine of incrementalism that defined previous decades of Middle Eastern involvement. Instead, the current strategy is characterized by a relentless, methodical, and overwhelming application of force designed to achieve a definitive conclusion. As the conflict enters this new and more aggressive phase, the human and material cost of the war machine continues to be a central point of internal and external debate. Senior military leadership and defense officials have been vocal about the scale of the destruction already visited upon the opposition, noting that over 7,000 distinct targets have been struck across the Iranian landscape. These targets are not limited to frontline combat units, but extend deep into the logistical and command and control architecture of the nation. The objective is the total degradation of the enemy's capacity to wage sustained war, a task that requires the persistent hunting of ballistic missile batteries and medium-range launch platforms that have historically served as the primary deterrent against regional intervention. This shift toward a more assertive posture is intended to send a clear signal to both allies and adversaries. The era of contained skirmishes is ended, replaced by a comprehensive campaign of atmospheric and naval dominance. While the opposition entered this fight with a robust arsenal of sophisticated weaponry, the sheer volume of the current air campaign is designed to outpace their ability to reload, repair, or reposition. The focus remains on a hunt-and-kill philosophy that prioritizes the elimination of high-value assets before they can be utilized against neighboring sovereign states or international energy interests. The geopolitical stakes reached a fever pitch following a major escalation in which Iranian forces intensified their kinetic actions against Gulf Arab neighbors, specifically targeting energy infrastructure that serves as the lifeblood of the global economy. This surge in regional hostility followed a precision strike by Israeli forces on a primary natural gas field, an event that appears to have triggered a broader, more desperate retaliatory strategy from Tehran. By striking at refineries and processing plants that supply a vast portion of the world's natural gas and oil, the opposition is attempting to leverage global economic stability as a shield against further military degradation. However, this tactic seems to have backfired, instead hardening the resolve of the international community and accelerating the formation of a unified front. The reality on the ground is one of a grinding, high-stakes war of attrition, where the technological superiority of the United States and its partners is being pitted against the asymmetric capabilities of a cornered regime. Despite the significant damage inflicted upon their conventional forces, the opposition still retains the ability to launch sporadic, high-impact missile volleys, as evidenced by a recent successful strike on a Saudi oil refinery situated along the Red Sea. This incident serves as a stark reminder that even as their total warfighting capacity diminishes, the threat posed by residual mobile launchers remains a primary concern for theater commanders. In the halls of power in Washington, the financial and diplomatic machinery is moving in lockstep with the military operations. The Secretary of Defense, alongside the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has maintained a consistent narrative of inevitable victory, asserting that the United States is gaining significant leverage on a daily basis. Yet the cost of maintaining this level of operational tempo is staggering. Discussions regarding a new war supplemental package have surfaced, with figures as high as $200 billion being floated as a necessary investment to ensure the continued suppression of hostile forces. The justification provided for such a monumental request is grounded in the harsh reality of modern warfare. The systematic elimination of entrenched and well-armed adversaries requires a sustained influx of capital to maintain munition stocks and technical readiness. There is an acknowledgement among top-tier officials that the price of security in the region is high, but the alternative, a resurgent and unchecked regional power, is deemed unacceptable. This financial request is currently moving toward the legislative branch, where it is expected to face intense scrutiny, though proponents argue that the speed and decisiveness of the current campaign will ultimately prevent the onset of a forever war scenario. The administration remains committed to a timeline that avoids the pitfalls of previous protracted conflicts, seeking a resolution that is swift, albeit costly. The diplomatic front is equally volatile, as Iran has begun to explicitly label United States diplomatic outposts, including embassies and consulates, as legitimate military targets. This move, particularly the recent threats directed toward the facility in Baghdad, represents a significant and largely unprecedented departure from established international norms. In response, the posture of the defense establishment has shifted toward an offensive defense mindset. The prevailing philosophy is that the most effective way to protect diplomatic personnel and infrastructure is to eliminate the threats at their source, often before they can even mobilize for an attack. This proactive approach has led to a series of preemptive strikes against cells and units suspected of planning incursions against non-military installations. While the opposition's move to target diplomats is viewed as an act of desperation, it has nonetheless heightened the sense of urgency within the coalition. The narrative being projected to the public and to international partners is one of unwavering confidence. The message is that the coalition will not be deterred by threats to its civil servants and will continue to apply maximum pressure until the opposition's ability to coordinate such attacks is entirely extinguished. As the international community watches the unfolding chaos, there are signs of a shifting tide in global alliances. A brand new statement emerging from a collective of key allies, including the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Japan, suggests a newfound readiness to contribute to the efforts of ensuring safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. This development is being viewed as a potential turning point in the diplomatic struggle to share the burden of regional security. For days, high-level officials have been working behind the scenes to rally European and Asian partners, facing the dual challenges of domestic political sensitivities and a general reluctance to become embroiled in another Middle Eastern conflict. In many European capitals, the political landscape is complicated by factions that are historically critical of regional interventions and aligned with anti-war sentiments. However, the direct threat to global energy security and the blatant disregard for maritime law shown by the opposition appear to be outweighing these domestic concerns. The commitment to preparatory planning for maritime protection is a significant, if cautious, step toward a truly multilateral response. It remains to be seen how quickly these pledges of support will translate into actual naval deployments, but for now the momentum seems to be shifting in favor of a broader coalition effort. The internal logic of the campaign is built on the premise that total victory is the only viable exit strategy. While reporters and analysts press for a specific timeline, the leadership remains elusive, offering only the assurance that the engagement will conclude somewhere between the present moment and the indefinite future. This lack of a concrete deadline is a deliberate strategic choice, intended to deprive the enemy of the hope that they can simply outweight the coalition's resolve. The current administration is acutely aware of the public's exhaustion with long-term military commitments, yet they argue that the current situation demands a level of intensity that cannot be constrained by arbitrary dates. The focus is on the mission, the methodical destruction of the opposition's war-making potential. Every strike on a missile silo, every intercepted fast attack boat, and every neutralized command cell is a step toward that goal. The conflict is being described as a necessary crucible through which a more stable regional order will be forged. As the sun sets on another day of heavy bombardment, the message from the front lines and the briefing rooms remains identical. The coalition is winning, the enemy is fading, and the pressure will only continue to mount until the objectives are fully realized. The theater of operations has expanded beyond the initial maritime skirmishes, evolving into a sophisticated campaign of interdiction that seeks to sever the logistical arteries of the opposition's remaining command structure. Military analysts monitoring the situation from high-altitude surveillance platforms have noted a marked decrease in the enemy's organized movement, suggesting that the relentless bombardment of transit hubs and fuel depots is achieving its intended effect. The strategy, as articulated by senior defense officials, is no longer focused solely on the immediate neutralization of threats, but on the long-term dismantling of the industrial base that allows for the replenishment of advanced munitions. Reports from the ground indicate that the precision of the strikes has reached a point where even mobile units, once thought to be elusive, are being intercepted with devastating regularity. This shift in the operational environment is a direct result of the integration of real-time satellite intelligence with strike packages that are perpetually on station, ready to engage targets within minutes of identification. The psychological impact on the opposing forces is becoming increasingly apparent, as their communication networks show signs of fragmentation and their tactical responses appear increasingly uncoordinated and reactive rather than proactive. Central to this phase of the conflict is the continued suppression of the ballistic missile threat, which remains the most potent weapon in the opposition's arsenal for regional destabilization. Intelligence gathered from intercepted communications and ground-level reconnaissance suggests that while many fixed launch sites have been rendered inoperative, a significant number of mobile transport erector launchers are still hidden within the rugged terrain of the interior. These assets are the primary focus of the current hunt-and-kill missions, which involves specialized special operations forces working in tandem with unmanned aerial vehicles to provide persistent overwatch. The difficulty of this task is not underestimated by theater commanders, who acknowledge that the terrain offers numerous natural hiding spots, such as caves and deep ravines, where these launchers can be stowed away between firing windows. However, the technological gap is proving to be an insurmountable hurdle for the defenders, as thermal imaging and synthetic aperture radar allow coalition forces to see through camouflage and environmental obstacles that would have provided safety in previous eras of warfare. Each successful engagement against these missile platforms not only removes a physical threat, but also further erodes the opposition's leverage over neighboring states who have lived under the shadow of these weapons for years. The economic dimensions of the war are becoming just as critical as the kinetic engagements, with the global energy market reacting with unprecedented volatility to the strikes on refinery infrastructure. While the coalition has successfully protected the majority of the shipping lanes through the Strait of Hormuz, the damage already inflicted upon regional processing plants has created a supply shock that is reverberating through international stock exchanges. In Washington, this has led to a dual-track strategy, providing the military with the resources it needs to end the conflict quickly while simultaneously working with energy-producing partners to stabilize the flow of oil and gas. The proposed $200 billion war supplemental is being framed as an insurance policy against a prolonged global depression. The argument is that a decisive victory now is far cheaper than an indefinite period of regional instability that keeps energy prices at record highs. Critics in the legislative branch have raised concerns about the lack of a clear endgame, but the administration has counter-argued that the endgame is the total removal of the opposition's ability to threaten global commerce. This narrative of security through strength is being used to build a domestic consensus for the massive expenditure, emphasizing that the investment is not just in military hardware, but in the long-term stability of the international order. Diplomatically, the pressure is mounting on nations that have historically attempted to remain neutral or maintain a balanced relationship with the opposition. The recent commitment from the United Kingdom, France, and Japan to assist in maritime security marks a significant shift in the international landscape, signaling that the era of passive observation has ended. This newfound cooperation is not without its internal friction, as many of these governments must contend with significant domestic opposition to military involvement. In Europe, the political fallout has been particularly intense, with various factions debating the ethics of the intervention and the potential for a wider regional conflagration. Despite these internal pressures, the reality of the threat to their own energy security has forced a pragmatic realignment. The collective statement issued by these nations is a carefully worded document that expresses a readiness to contribute, a phrase that allows for a wide range of support from logistical aid to direct naval participation. The United States State Department has welcomed this development as a validation of its maximum pressure campaign, asserting that the world is finally recognizing the necessity of a unified front against a regime that has shown a total disregard for international law and diplomatic norms. The threat to diplomatic facilities in the region remains a top priority, leading to a significant increase in the defensive posture of all Western outposts. The decision by the opposition to treat embassies as military targets is being characterized by coalition officials as a desperate attempt to force a de-escalation by taking hostages or inflicting high-profile civilian casualties. In response, a ring of steel has been established around key facilities, particularly in Baghdad and other regional capitals, involving both elite security detachments and sophisticated electronic warfare systems designed to intercept incoming projectiles. This defensive effort is being paired with an aggressive intelligence-gathering operation aimed at identifying the command and control nodes responsible for planning these attacks. The message being sent to the opposition is clear. Any strike against a diplomatic facility will be met with a disproportionate response against the highest levels of their military leadership. This policy of deterrence through the threat of immediate and severe retaliation is designed to prevent the conflict from devolving into a series of asymmetric attacks on non-military personnel, which would only serve to prolong the suffering and complicate the eventual path to peace. As the air campaign continues to pound targets with rhythmic intensity, the focus is also shifting toward the potential for a ground component, though officials remain tight-lipped about such possibilities. For now, the emphasis is on maintaining the air and sea dominance that has characterized the first few weeks of the war. The goal is to reach a tipping point where the opposition's military hierarchy realizes that continued resistance is not only futile, but will result in the total annihilation of their national infrastructure. This boiling the frog approach is intended to force a collapse from within, as the rank-and-file soldiers and mid-level officers begin to see the hopelessness of their situation. Reports of desertions and low morale among the defending forces have begun to filter out, though they are difficult to verify given the fog of war. Nonetheless, the coalition remains committed to its course, confident that the combination of technological superiority, economic pressure, and international isolation will eventually break the will of the opposition. The narrative of inevitable victory is not just a rhetorical tool for public consumption, it is a fundamental component of the strategic plan, designed to demoralize the enemy and reassure the global community that the end of the conflict is a matter of when, not if. The complexity of the regional dynamics cannot be overstated, as every strike and every diplomatic maneuver carries with it the risk of unintended consequences. The interplay between traditional rivalries and the current conflict has created a volatile environment where old alliances are being tested and new ones are being forged in the heat of battle. The role of Japan and the European powers is particularly noteworthy, as their involvement represents a departure from decades of cautious engagement. This broadening of the coalition is being hailed by supporters as a new model for international security, one where the burden of maintaining global order is shared more equitably among those who benefit from it. However, the challenges of coordinating such a diverse group of nations, each with its own political and strategic interests, are immense. For the United States, the task is to provide the leadership and the lion's share of the military capability while ensuring that its partners feel invested in the outcome. As the war enters its second month, the focus remains on the immediate mission, the methodical and relentless pursuit of the enemy's war machine until it is nothing more than a memory in the annals of history. The theater of operations has now entered a phase of granular attrition, where the broad strokes of initial bombardment have given way to a high-fidelity scouring of the landscape. Military intelligence reports indicate that the primary objective has shifted from destroying static infrastructure to the relentless neutralization of mobile, hidden, and redundant systems that the opposition had hoped would survive a first strike scenario. This tactical evolution is most visible in the central corridors of the Iranian interior, where specialized strike packages are utilizing advanced synthetic aperture radar to peel back layers of deception. The opposition's strategy of using ghost batteries, decoy missile launchers, and inflatable silhouettes has been largely rendered ineffective by multispectral sensors that can distinguish the thermal signature of a live engine from a hollow shell. Consequently, the rate of successful engagements against genuine ballistic threats has seen a marked uptick, further compressing the window of opportunity for the adversary to launch any meaningful counteroffensive. This level of precision is not merely a technical achievement, it is a psychological bludgeon intended to convince the remaining command structure that no amount of camouflage or subterranean shielding can offer sanctuary from the reach of the coalition. As the physical environment of the war becomes increasingly lethal for the defenders, the logistical strain on their remaining forces is reaching a breaking point. The systematic destruction of secondary and tertiary fuel refineries has created a localized energy vacuum, effectively grounding a significant portion of the opposition's mechanized units. Reports from surveillance drones depict long convoys of stalled military hardware, abandoned by crews who no longer have the fuel to move them or the parts to repair them. This stagnation has allowed coalition forces to transition from a policy of active engagement to one of containment and observation, where enemy units are allowed to wither in place rather than being targeted with expensive munitions. This conservation of resources is a strategic necessity, particularly as the debate over the $200 billion war supplemental continues to intensify in the halls of government. The argument from the military leadership is that by spending heavily now on high-end intelligence and precision assets, they are actually shortening the duration of the conflict and preventing the need for a massive multi-year ground occupation that would cost trillions. The focus is on a surgical decapitation of the war machine, leaving the civilian infrastructure as intact as possible to facilitate a post-conflict transition. Internationally, the Strait of Hormuz coalition has begun to formalize its operational procedures, moving from high-level diplomatic pledges to concrete naval integration. The inclusion of Japanese maritime self-defense forces alongside British and French naval groups represents a historic shift in regional security architecture. This multilateral presence serves a dual purpose. It secures the vital energy arteries that fuel the global economy, and it creates a diplomatic shield that complicates the opposition's attempts to frame the conflict as a bilateral struggle against a single superpower. By involving a broad array of global stakeholders, the coalition has effectively internationalized the defense of the rules-based order. However, this integration has not been without its friction. Command and control challenges arise when merging the disparate communication protocols and rules of engagement of 6 different nations. Senior naval commanders have spent the last 78 hours conducting intensive bridge-to-bridge coordination exercises to ensure that the response to any sudden provocation, such as a swarm of explosive-laden fast boats or a low-altitude cruise missile, is seamless and overwhelming. The message to the world is that the maritime commons are no longer a playground for asymmetric harassment, but are now a heavily guarded fortress. The domestic political landscape within the United States is undergoing a profound transformation as leadership officially pivots away from the decades-old doctrine of winning hearts and minds in favor of the cold, physical liquidation of enemy capabilities. This represents a fundamental shift in the American warfighting philosophy. The objective is no longer to reform a nation or court its population, but to systematically erase its ability to project violence. By prioritizing the destruction of irreplaceable manufacturing plants, specifically those specialized facilities responsible for the microcircuitry and guidance systems of medium-range missiles, the administration is executing a clearing-the-board strategy. This total blockade ensures that once a high-value asset is destroyed, it remains gone forever. This non-incremental approach relies on hard, tangible metrics to sustain public morale, pointing to over 7,000 neutralized targets and the reopening of vital shipping lanes as proof of success. By focusing on these indisputable military victories, the government is effectively sidestepping the messy, abstract, and often divisive questions regarding long-term political stability or the eventual power vacuum that follows such a total dismantling of a state's defenses. On the ground, this clinical approach to warfare is mirrored in the transformation of diplomatic outposts into hardened, fortified forward operating bases. The embassy in Baghdad, once a symbol of civilian outreach, has been encased in a ring of steel that operates with a zero-tolerance mandate. To prevent shadow proxies from dragging coalition forces into the meat grinder of urban warfare, a sophisticated no-go perimeter has been established. This exclusion zone is managed not just by elite soldiers, but by a dense network of autonomous robotic sensors and persistent aerial overwatch that utilizes artificial intelligence to identify threats in real time. The policy is simple. Any unauthorized penetration of this zone is met with immediate lethal kinetic force. This containment strategy is designed to keep the theater of war strictly confined to industrial and military sectors, ensuring that the chaos of the battlefield does not spill over into complex civilian environments where the rules of engagement are restrictive and the political risks are exponentially higher. Economically, the conflict has become a desperate race against the risk premium currently suffocating global energy markets. With tanker insurance rates at historic highs, the coalition recognizes that military victory must be achieved before global economic exhaustion sets in. To beat this ticking clock, the air campaign has transitioned into a relentless 24/7 strike tempo, specifically engineered to overwhelm the recovery. The logic is one of sheer mathematical dominance. For every hour the enemy spends attempting to patch a runway or salvage a radar array, coalition munitions take 2 more critical infrastructure nodes offline. This high-intensity pressure is designed to force a definitive systemic collapse by ensuring the opposition cannot repair its backbone faster than it is being shattered. While this pace is taxing for the men and machines involved, it is viewed as a mandatory sacrifice to ensure the global economy remains viable while the enemy's war machine is ground into the dust. In the final, most lethal phase of the campaign, the coalition has shifted from broad strategic bombing to high-precision sniping of the remaining mobile missile units and deep-buried command centers. This surgical approach has left the opposition isolated and stripped of its primary deterrence. Yet the coalition remains unmoved by calls for de-escalation. There is a total refusal to entertain a ceasefire or diplomatic off-ramps until every military objective is met in its entirety. With victory now a certainty, the only remaining question is how much of the enemy's military identity will even exist once the dust settles. The ultimate goal is a peace dictated by a total vacuum, a region where the threat has not just been suppressed but entirely liquidated. The conflict has now reached a definitive terminal phase, characterized by the absolute suppression of the opposition's remaining strategic depth. In the final sweep of the Central Highlands and coastal fringes, coalition forces have transitioned from high-altitude bombardment to a relentless area denial posture, ensuring that no facet of the enemy's war machine can be reconstituted. Tactical intelligence indicates that the command and control hierarchy of the opposition has effectively dissolved into disconnected regional cells, stripped of their ability to synchronize large-scale ballistic volleys or maritime swarms. This fragmentation is the intended result of a campaign that refused to settle for incremental gains, instead opting for a total systemic collapse of the adversary's logistical backbone. The focus has sharpened on the final remnants of the mobile missile inventory, which are being neutralized with such frequency that the threat of a meaningful retaliatory strike against neighboring energy hubs has been virtually extinguished. The skies are now entirely dominated by coalition surveillance and strike assets, which operate with a level of impunity that signals the end of the contested phase of the war. The massive $200 billion defense investment has yielded a swift conclusion to the conflict, bypassing the attrition of a forever war through high-intensity precision strikes. This war of finality has dismantled the opposition's infrastructure, securing global energy routes and stabilizing international markets. A robust multinational coalition now provides permanent maritime security in the Strait of Hormuz, while the successful protection of diplomatic outposts has established a new global standard for deterrence. With the enemy's military and psychological will shattered, the campaign has transitioned from active combat to a post-conflict transition. Thousands of targets have been neutralized, proving that technological and financial superiority can achieve total systemic collapse in a matter of weeks. The mission has concluded not through negotiation, but through the absolute eradication of the adversary's capacity to wage war, permanently altering the regional power balance.